Alright, we're going to get Quake II and Anachronox BSP, or map files, the levels basically, into Blender from the actual game files. This is a Blender add-on I've made for that purpose. Here's an example of each one of them. So first we need to install the add-on, obviously. Control comma will bring this up quickly. Add-ons is the legacy format, so I have made this an extension. So you go to here and install from disk. And there's the zip file. Or installed, simple as that. So after doing that, if you go to this import menu, you'll see this new idtech2 importer, and we're going to come back to that. So first we need to, in the case of Quake 2, extract the pack files where these BSP files and textures are. So I have a tool for that as well. There are lots of these that already exist, but a lot of them are command line, and this just makes it a little easier, so I just built this to simplify the process. So we have the game directory itself. This is after installing it, in my case, just from Good Old Games through Heroic on Linux, but the file should be the same. First, we need to select where we're going to export the pack files to. So I'm going to select this game folder for that. Then we're going to select the pack file in question. So here, this base Q2, that's base Quake 2, I'm quite certain. You'll see these three pack files, at least these first two anyway, are going to be where the majority of these textures are, and some other BSPs as well. So I'm going to click that. You'll see the files listed, and you see there are a lot of textures and such in here, some other stuff. I'm just going to extract those all into that base game folder and explain why as we go here. I'm going to get the next file here too, the pack 1, and because we have some more textures in there. Extract all. And the third one just has like 2 files that we don't need. So anyway, what you'll see here is this maps folder was not here before. So right in the base game folder, there are other maps or other BSP files that were in the pack file. You'll see in some of these other folders, like Chaos, for example, you'll have maps within those folders. Now, the reason you can't just export the, like these pack files to this folder and just have each level's files available within its own folder is because they share some of the textures and such from that base Quake 2 stuff that has been extracted here. This textures folder at this top level. Those are needed for several of the other maps as well. So keep that in mind. That's going to come into play into the add-on. I have a way to search for those texture files. So in Blender, I'm going to go to actually import one of these now. Right here in Quake 2. I'm going to start with one of the maps that was extracted from the base Quake 2 here. So we're going to go in here, and keep in mind it's going to need to find textures in this adjacent folder here. So if I go in here and pick a BSP, this parent level search over here is designed for this mess. So it can be set to 0, 1, or 2. In this case, we want to go up 1 folder. What it's going to do is literally search the folders recursively for any of the texture files that match what's in the BSP file they're referred to in there. So here we need to go up 1 parent level to get to the Quake 2 directory to find all the textures that this thing is referring to. That's why we need to do that. Now, as I hint here with the tooltip, be careful with this, because if you set this incorrectly, and by that I mean to a folder outside your game directory, it's going to recursively search that folder. So if I'm searching like the entire home folder, it's going to hang Blender. You may need to shut it down depending on how much is in there. It's not going to Skynet you, but it will be unfortunate. So now that we've got that set correctly, I'm going to grab this one. And there's the geometry, and we're going to go to texture view to make sure everything's kosher there. Great. So when you see this type of texture up here, this orange stuff, that type of thing tends to be, I believe, skyboxes or environmental textures that were put in there. That's why those are there. And you can go in, you can see, hooray. These you'll see in a lot of these maps where it's just a trigger for something that happened whenever a character ran into it. You can delete those, do whatever you want. Cool. So with that in, I'm going to move that out of the way. I'm going to import one of the subfolder maps, if you will. I'm going to go here again and go back up to the main folder. And this is an example where we need the 2 parent levels. So if I set that to 2, now in here we have the Chaos folder, and within that we have the Maps folder. That's where those BSPs are. And so you can see here it needs to jump up 2 levels to be able to access the textures, again, the ones that are shared across many of the maps. So I'm going to set that. This is 2. We're good there. Import. There we go. Cool. So let's take a look inside real quick. Everything looks like it should. Nice. So what you may notice about this is the light maps are not incorporated, or it doesn't look quite the same as the game. So that's something we need to touch on a little bit here. Light maps are basically shading. So everything starts at full brightness, and the light maps are applying a color or a darkness to those textures, and that creates, like kind of some static shading in there. At the time, greatly improve the realism. So you may or may not want those depending on what you want to do with the map. I'm going to go to Anachronox next. Anachronox, you want to leave this at 0. This is simpler. So Anachronox, by the way, if anyone's interested in that, you do have to do a similar thing and extract files, but I have a DAT extractor for that, which is basically the same, was the inspiration of this, if you will. Those you need the textures DAT file and the maps DAT file from the game, and similarly those will extract like so. This is the BSPs. And you got the BSP files, and you'll have in here the actual textures, I believe. So here I can search for everything within this folder. That's why this is fine to leave at 0. So I'm going to grab Rowdies here. That's the first place people would see in that game. And I'm going to apply the light maps, and you'll see I have a slider here to, indicate how influential you want those light maps to be. You'll see why that's necessary. So if I bring Rowdies in, this is things get dark quickly. So you can see in here you can barely see. Now, this game, there are a couple, the signs you can see, whatever. So there's a couple things to consider here. Is first, the game itself is going to have dynamic lighting in the Quake II engine, or in this case, a very heavily modified Quake II engine. So you have to consider that as far as what the actual thing is supposed to look like, and also what you're going to do with it. So if you're trying to recreate a scene right in Blender, lighting doesn't necessarily have to be baked in. It can be, you add a light and it can be dynamic lighting, and you'd probably want to do that. So let's get rid of that one. And if I do that without the light maps, I'll illustrate the point. So there. So, and you probably don't want it this far either, because what happens is the name light maps, I feel like it's, sort of accurate. It's not only light in some cases. So Rowdies isn't a great example. There's another one called Send Dormitory. So I'm going to leave light maps off here. And if you've played the game, you'll know this doesn't look anything like the game color-wise. It's a gloomy area, but the colors don't even look right in this case. So I'm going to go import that again, and I'm going to apply the light maps. And this one you really do want them almost full here. So there we go. And now, if you haven't played it, trust me, that's much closer to what it looks like in the actual game. So the point being is the light maps, sometimes it really does seem like it's mostly literally lighting. Other times like this, it seems like it's as much color as it is lighting. So that's why you might want to tweak the influence of the light map depending on the application. Like different maps, as we saw with Rowdies, this would look completely black, but here it makes sense to apply more of them. I'm going to show the material just so we understand this a little better. So when you add the light maps in those options, it adds this down here, and this is where the influence is set, by the way. You could actually change it after, but you'd have to do it for each material. So something to notice about these is I don't think this is perfect. They're a little tricky to translate to Blender. You might see an edge that's a little weird, and I think that comes from the interpolation. By default, you're blending the pixels. I'm going to look at the actual image in the UV editor here. I'm going to look at and type in Atlas. So you see I create the all of the light maps are just kind of a texture applied to each face. So this just combines them all into one giant light map Atlas texture here. If you're using a reasonably recent version of Blender, this option is pretty handy up here. If you click that on to sync selection, you can select a face over here. Then if your mouse is in this area, press the numpad period, and it'll take you to the corresponding face in this case. So you can see the light maps, these are not detailed images, these are pixels. So the way these originally worked is you don't need light information for every pixel of the face. So what this actually does is apply one pixel in the light map to a 16 by 16 pixel area in the actual face. If you didn't have interpolation at all here, like you set it the closest, like you can see this very jagged edge here. So if you wanted the true actual light map, the closest would get you there. But you can see here, it's not as obvious here as it would be on other maps, but this doesn't look right. There's this very obvious division, partly because of that 16:1 mapping, and that's why this is actually a separate UV layer. By the way, here you can see UV map and light map UV map, so you don't really want closest either, so I leave that at linear, but that's not necessarily exactly how the Quake 2 engine would have handled it, so just be aware that it's not perfect. And here we can kind of live see, now that I've selected like the actual dynamic influence of the light map. One other thing I want to mention is there are animation textures in BSPs, and you can actually have part of the level animated, the faces, and it's literally a texture swap. So I'm going to go back to Rowdy's for a quick moment here. No light map so we can see it. I'm going to go in here. It can be a little annoying to navigate in here. You can always tab into edit, select the face, and numpad period to focus on that to give yourself, that's the new pivot point. This is what I'm after. Get over there. So this is the example I'm after here. This little table here, I don't even think it works with a lot of the ported versions of Anachronox. With the original game, this was animated, and it would be like a little Simon Turn table here. Now the way that works is by those animation textures. I actually do log when this happens in the importer. So this is the example. This spin texture is actually what's applicable here. I probably should create a material out of this for facility, but I don't yet, at least. So it's just going to take the first texture whenever there's an animated texture. Now there is a way in Blender for you to, have this functionality, and that goes with the source of the image. So here you've got single image. Now if this were done as an image sequence, you can set that to multiple images. Now I might add that just because it is useful if you're recreating a scene in Blender, but I haven't found a way for this to be useful for actually exporting to like a game engine or something like that. If you wanted to export GLTF or FBX, that doesn't translate to an animation. Those file formats don't really support like a texture swap. The best way I could think of to do it is building a shader in the game engine so that it could do that, but it's a very difficult thing to automate. So right now it doesn't attempt that at all. But just so you could do something like this. What I might do is add at least creating the material for those other images, so the images are imported, and then you could select that. But for now, it's just the first texture. So to kind of hammer this home, I'm going to use another map from Anachronox that absolutely needs the light maps applied. I'm going to throw it, I don't know, 84, whatever. That's the red light district. And I'm also going to do show entities. Now this is for the BSP nerds out there, basically. Entities in the BSP files are essentially metadata. It'll have, game logic. It'll have locations of events or spawns, anything like that. So I'm going to just import this. All right, so you see these little empties around here. Here's the textures, and yeah, this is not red light at all without those light maps. So these entities here, you can see I have a list of these over here, a collection rather. If it has a location, and in this particular case the origin is what I'm looking for. By the way, this is before scaling, so if you look at the import menu, it defaults the scale to 0.0254. For these Quake 2 objects, that just seems to be about right, like a person's a little under 2 meters tall or 2 Blender units. You can change that if you want, but just keep in mind that if you see this origin, that's before the scaling. This is the original coordinate system, which is why the numbers are absurdly large in comparison. So okay, you can see here that's a spawn. So by the way, whenever you click in there, these should face the viewport. And those are only the ones that have the origin property, so to speak. If they don't have an origin property, I don't know where to put them, but you might still be interested if you're just looking into the old games for whatever reason. So if you click on the mesh you imported here and go to the object data properties down here on custom properties, you'll see an entity for basically everyone that didn't have a location, right? So it's just named in the order it got them. So if you're into reverse engineering these things at all like that, you can see this data without going into a hex editor, basically. But anyway, that's essentially it. So cool, you've got them in the Blender. Now you can do whatever you want with them.